Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada, Wallace Klinck. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi, Arnie, and hi, Bob. I see you there too. So it will be an interesting session, I'm sure.
No worries. And Robert Klinck, also from Canada. Welcome, Robert.
Good to be back with you again, Arnie.
No worries. Now, I want to, you'll see the title that's there, Security, Institutional and Personal, and I just wanted to cut across to the actual document itself that we're talking about. And this document is found in the ALOR library under Douglas. Douglas, let's have a look. Douglas is there. And then we go down to security, institutional and personal, which I'll find in a sec, except I've lost it. But either way, it's there under Douglas, and there's the document. So that's how you navigate to the document. And what I found most profound within the document itself, as Douglas is writing, is that the difference between policy and administration. And in the document, Douglas refers to actually a train system, and the policy being that you want to go from A to B, from London to Liverpool or something like that. Whereas the administration is it a fast train? Is it a slow train? Do you want to actually catch a cab? Do you want to walk or pedal or whatever? And that's administration. But the policy is that you want to actually get from London to Liverpool. Now, in regard to politics, it's no different. We actually get confused in our, if you like, we've just gone through an election process in Australia, and we get very confused arguing about administration, about how we're going to do this or how we're going to do that, instead of this is what we actually want. And I would suggest that the policy that we should be pursuing is one of freedom, to choose or refuse one thing at a time. Wally, your thoughts?
Well, yes, we should be able to choose whether or not we're going to go to Liverpool or without being told by someone else, some higher authority, that that is where we're going to go. And we should have the freedom to do that, and we should have the means to do it. And we have to have, if we don't have security, we don't have the means to do it, because we're then at the mercy of an exterior authority, which can dictate our behavior and our performance. So that is, Douglas is speaking here of the proper relationship of the individual citizen and his political representative, whom Douglas said should be representative and not a delegate. You should, as a citizen, be able to indicate to your representative exactly what policy you want, but not the details as to how it should be accomplished. And that is one of the very important aspects of association, which we have to understand correctly if we're going to function, successfully as a society and as free individuals.
That's an excellent opening salvo. Thank you, Wallace. Robert Klinck, your thoughts?
Well, Douglas, as we've said in the previous broadcast, believed in something he designated as a canon, which is the right way of doing things. And one aspect of this would be prioritizing policy as opposed to administration. And what we have in our societies today is an attempt to concentrate people's attention on administration, primarily, I would say, through the party system and the creation of political platforms, because political platforms are always one or two removes away from what the population really wants in the most fundamental way, which is prosperity and freedom.
That's very, very important. That's exactly right. Sorry, Robert, keep going.
No, that's fine. That's
okay.
Fine.
I watched a short video clip by Brother Nathaniel the other day, and he talked about what most people want in America. And I thought it was most profound. He touched on it that what they want is they want sufficient security to have their own home. And I might add to that. And he also condemned the high-rise chicken coops that people are being forced and compelled to live in rather than their own freestanding home. And I would add that what they also need is sufficient land that they have a relationship with the soil, because it's from the earth that we come, and it's from the earth that the life forces are given to us. The air that we breathe, the sunshine, the rain, and the soil, which provides so much sustenance for us, so much physical sustenance. And I'm one who loves this garden, and I love the relationship that other creatures have with the soil. And I think it's most profound. If you're living in a high rise, it's so difficult to have that actual relationship. So a home is most important. Now, in our election campaign that was just come through, there was no mention of increased security for homeowners or job tenure where a manufacturing base was sufficient. And I find it fascinating because it seems to be that there's this conflict, this, if you like, an intellectual conflict. I'll bring up the words of St. Paul, where he says, "If you shall not work, you shall not eat." And in this article, Douglas talks about that if you shall not work, will there still be enough to eat? Is there a sufficiency to eat? And of course there is. With automation, robotics, advanced control, we can produce. In actual fact, agricultural base, the labour base, has gone in the last 150 years from 75% of the workforce down to as little as 3 or 4% of the workforce. So we have no trouble providing the food to eat. And therefore the question comes to, what is our relationship with work? What should it be in this age of advanced control? I believe it's been turned on its head, and that the only meaning I can extract from the words of St. Paul relevant to today is that if we shall not worship or put our, if you like, our fundamental Christian faith into works, into practice, then neither shall we inherit, neither shall we actually receive the fruit that is there. We actually have to have this relationship of actually putting it to work. Wallace, your thoughts?
Well, we're told that if we seek the kingdom, all these other things will be given to us, not provided to us, provided we go out and do a lot of physical manual labor. The promise is that these things will be given to us. And of course, we see in our cultural heritage the way it has developed over the eons, from one discovery to another, which seems to come, when discoveries are made, they seem to come by intuition, almost as a flash. I think when you're seeking something, there's a tendency for something to come by intuition to you. It's not as though you've had to put out so many ergs of energy in order to achieve the knowledge of this particular new principle or whatever it is, which allows you to do things more efficiently and more precisely. So I think that, and I mean, certainly the Christian message too is very clear. Works are as filthy rags. In other words, if you are all tied up in works, you are engaged in idolatrous worship. And that is not a proper attitude toward, it's like full employment. Douglas said that full employment is a policy that is being imposed upon you by the financial powers. In other words, it's something that you are it's a policy that you are having foisted upon you, although it's not necessary because of the tremendous cultural heritage, the productivity that has developed from our cultural heritage. Even in our more northern climates, we're perfectly capable of producing many of the things that we currently import. We're quite capable of developing new, in fact, we do have in Alberta an agricultural project which is all under glass. And I understand it's quite successful. So, I mean, we have enormous productive capacity, and that should give us security. Should give us absolute. Douglas said we want to alter the situation so that people have absolute economic security. There's no implication of there being anything in that kind of a situation that would lead to a degradation of the human soul or morals or ethics. Those are things that are quite different from work. Work has no way of defining you as an individual. You can work until you're to the bone, and if you don't do it with the right attitude or with the right purpose, objective, like fighting wars and so on, it doesn't help anyone. Everybody loses.
That's right.
And so it's the quality of what you do that counts. And our efficiency is so great that we don't really have to do a lot of physical work. We should be able to spend more time marveling at the grandeur of the universe, of God's creation, and just marveling at the glory of it all, at the enormity of it all, at the mystery of it all.
That's beautiful.
The magnificence of it all.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Wally. Robert, your thoughts?
Well, we have very little experience of direct results from the progress of human ingenuity and productivity. Most of the fruits are alienated from us by the financial system, which provides us with a very poor representation of the real wealth of society. So if you look at our capacity for production and the way in which human life has evolved in terms of personal security, it's hardly changed. In fact, in some respects, it's diminished, and our existence has become in many ways more precarious, as people have observed. Back in the 50s, one man could support his family, his wife could stay at home and take care of the kids, and they had a decent life. And now both parents, if they are parents, they probably wonder about whether they should become parents because it imposes such a financial burden upon them, have to work in order to have probably a lower standard of living than people had in the 1950s. So what benefits are we deriving from all this progress in technology and productive capacity? We just don't see them. So it's very important that we get a right appreciation of our relationship to this situation, and that will entail understanding that we have an inheritance in all this progress that is not being delivered to us. And that in fact, rather than that, we have a tax on inheritance everywhere in our society. I mean, now we have a lot in Canada, at least, I'm sure it's the same in Australia, a lot of residences for retired people, and they are just stripping the life assets of these people because they go into these places, they sell their home, and the proceeds from the sale give them 5 or 10 years in one of these institutions, and then they're destitute. It's got one of the greatest transfers of property in the history of mankind. And the communists, and there's no doubt that communist thinking has penetrated our societies at every level, want to govern humanity by means of fear and guilt. And they can only maintain this fear by keeping people away from the prosperity that they should inherently enjoy.
That's wonderfully put, and that's beautifully disseminated, Robert. Because to me the bounty that's there and this inheritance that's there, the cultural inheritance belongs to all. And the fact is, the opposite of taxation, which is what we should be receiving, is I'll refer to as a dividend. It's actually a payment rather than a negative payment which strips your, if you like, independence, which a tax is. It's a positive payment which ensures a sufficiency so that you're actually able to go to the marketplace and purchase what is your actual entitlement, your cultural entitlement. Now, if you look at the debt clock, you'll see that the assets are being garnished constantly. The real world assets are being garnished to central bankers and being stripped from all the nations of the world. And this is the policy. And in order to reverse that policy, you need to issue sufficient spending power that it reflects the actual material well-being that is there in the community, the technology, the advanced control, the raw materials, labour as necessary. But it's not as if everyone needs to work. That's not so. Robots, automation, industry, technology, not everyone needs to work in order for us to produce. You look at, as I said before, 75%, 150 years ago, 75% of the working population was involved in agriculture just to feed us. And now it's as little as 3%. What are the other 72% of the working population meant to do? And of course, it's not just 72%, because with this onus of the woman, the home body, to also be in the workforce, it's also doubled the workforce. And that's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous in a time of abundance. So policy is most important. Is it a pursuit of policy of freedom, or is it in pursuit of a policy of power? And that to me is the key. We're seeing it through the political parties, as Wally has said, through the political process. It never gets discussed, this policy of freedom, the right to choose or refuse, the right to actually receive your cultural inheritance. Wally.
Well, Douglas said that we live in an insane asylum. And he was very clear about pointing to the Bank of England, in this case, as being the source of the insanity. The Bank of England has a policy. It administers a financial system, a banking system, or oversees a system which issues money only for work, never for consumption. Now, if labor were the only factor involved in production, that might make some rational sense. But labor is increasingly diminishing in its role in production. As we know, all you have to do to go to an automated auto factory or distribution point or whatever, and you see how little labor actually is involved as a factor of production. We are the created. Does it make sense that the created would not also have access to what is necessary for its maintenance? It doesn't make sense. If you look at nature, organisms in nature do have access to their environment, to their means of sustenance from their environment. The only work they have to put out for it is to go get it in general. Very rarely do they create the means of sustenance themselves. And we have actually degraded ourselves into a position of slavery where we cannot gain sustenance from our environment unless we are engaged in employment under somebody else's direction. And it is certainly a key aspect of Christianity that we should not attempt to dominate another human person, another human soul. We respect other people as being creations of God, if you want, and that they have certain rights, and that's the right to be free and to make their own choices and things. But you cannot, we live in a physical and a spiritual world. We cannot live a physical existence without physical means of sustenance. So we have to have it, whether we have to get it through slavery or whether we get it by inheritance, as you said. And inheritance is the increasing factor in the modern economy, but we're not credited with it.
Mm-hmm.
We are charged for our capital, and by capital I mean our tools, our factories, our plant, and all that, the means of production. We're charged for it in such a way that we're not credited for it, and yet when it is produced, it is part of the real credit of the nation for which we should be credited.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot pay wages to capital, you cannot pay wages to robots, but you can pay incomes to citizens, and that's what should be done. In a society, we're engaged in activities, and we end up with, I think, Arnie, as you said, a profit, a physical profit, which is the results, the real results of what our activities. And we have to have a means of distributing that. If we don't distribute it, the producers of it can't recover their costs.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't survive, and they can't continue to serve the community.
Mm.
Consumption is absolutely critical to the whole process. And yet consumption seems to be, from a moral, I say pseudo-moral standpoint, to be regarded as something profligate or something irresponsible or something bad. It's not. Production is for a purpose. If you don't fulfill the purpose, you are doing something bad. In other words, if you don't fulfill the purpose of the economy by providing for consumption, you are in fact doing something bad, quite evil as a matter of fact, because you're depriving the individual and society at large of the benefits of your activities.
That's an interesting observation, Wallace, and I must admit I've sat on that for years under the social credit thinking, that what is the purpose of having industry, of having the technology, of having the raw materials, the energy, everything that's there, and you turn the machine on, and if the machine's doing everything, how are you able to, as an individual, as a member of the community that's responsible for that machine, how are you able to actually harvest your inheritance, which is the output of that machine? Very important point. Robert.
Well, on the issue of inheritance, the third point in Marx's program under the Communist Manifesto was the cancellation of all rights to inheritance.
Right.
That was basically the cancellation of the rights of people to enjoy increasing freedom and prosperity, because it's the inheritance that we obtain these. So this is a program of dispossessing the population of what they should naturally have access to. And, furthers this policy of promoting personal insecurity, which I think is probably at a high point now, because what were formerly regarded as more or less lifetime jobs no longer exist. Everybody's on contract or threatened with termination of their employment. And so rather than developing a situation of increasing security, we're going in the opposite direction, and causing people increasingly to be insecure. And definitely all governments, which seem to have been inspired by Keynesian thinking, and Keynesian was a Fabian socialist, a follower of the Marxist lead, it was designed to keep people in an insecure position. So, Keynes said maybe in order to distribute income, we should go and bury money in mines and then have people go and dig it out of the mines. This is the kind of lunatic thinking these people will be driven to, because they absolutely refuse to recognize that people have any entitlement to the oceans of wealth that are surrounding them. Well, they'll shut the whole world down rather than allow people access to that.
That's a very profound observation from both of you gentlemen today. The cultural inheritance, which is there for all of us, but it's being shut up. It's being stopped up. And it's being stopped up by an alien philosophy and one of power over us. And of course, that philosophy or that policy emanating from central banks in order to control people rather than people be free to choose or refuse those things that they should be entitled to. It's fascinating that if you like, the conservative branch of politics is big on inheritance, their inheritance for their children, their progeny, but not for the community. Not for the community, not the cultural inheritance. They won't talk about it. And it's also interesting that if you like, the Labor side of politics, it's big on providing people with jobs so that they have some sort of income. We'll guarantee a job even if you're digging holes and filling them in again. We'll guarantee a job. What sort of madness is that? Give them sufficient negative taxation. Call it a dividend. Negative taxation. Give them sufficient spending power that they can actually harvest, inherit what is theirs. I find it a fascinating perspective that if you look at taxation, you think, what is this thing called a dividend? If you look at taxation, it's the opposite of taxation. So the policy is to strip the income, strip the well-being of the individual rather than the reverse, which is to release the individual. The policy is freedom. Freedom. Douglas social credit is a policy of freedom. I think I'll bring it up to a head on that one. I think that's a very good summary. Closing comments, please, Wally.
Yes, make no bones about it. There is, as Douglas said, there's a very concerted effort to destroy the concept of inheritance, because inheritance gives you freedom. It's unconditional. Everyone is to be put into a mode of employment, because employment is not secure. It's secure only so long as you bow to the will of an external power or an external will. That is not freedom, that is slavery.
That's right.
And the financial system is definitely designed to put us into that mode. Any attempt to destroy it, we should not be trying to destroy inheritance. We should be trying to universalize it, to widen it, to expand it, so that people in general do have the benefit of inheritance. People who do have large inheritances don't usually go around saying how they've been morally ruined by their inheritance. They don't usually go around bemoaning the fact that they have received an inheritance. They don't do that. Right. But they also don't seem to be very inclined to concern themselves about the right of everyone to have the inheritance that comes from the general communal or the benefits that have derived from association through the long period of time. No, because they don't belong to any specific individual. It's something that's accumulated, and we all use them in order to carry out our functions, and it gives us a major advance in production efficiency, which goes far beyond the contributions of labor, as we've said, and therefore, who are you going to pay these? How are you going to distribute the product? You can't pay robots; they wouldn't know what to do with it. But you can pay individuals, and the cost of the robots, the cost of the capital, is incorporated in the price of the goods. It has to be paid. So what do? You pay society at large to make up for it through a dividend, and also through additional consumption credits, which are advanced to the retailer at point of sale so that he can actually reduce his prices to give us the real advantage of technological efficiency. It makes no sense that we should have inflation when we're more and more and more efficient at producing things, which means reduction of cost.
That's right. And closing comments, Robert.
Well, I was reading, I don't know if I mentioned it the last time, I was reading a Wikipedia article about Shakespeare and how he had a hit play, Titus Andronicus. And they put it on, I think, for 3 weeks. It was very well attended, and they made a small fortune of it, consisting of £3. I think this is an indication of the progress of inflation through the ages, because that's just a sidelight. But on the inheritance thing, inheritance is a basis for the release of human initiative. And right now we got a situation where human initiative is being channeled into serving the will of a small number of individuals. But there is, in many individuals, a tremendous potential for development and for original thinking. I think of the farmers back when, a large proportion of the population were working on farms. And by the way, 3% might be producing all we need today, but it's also producing more than we need because all the nations of the world are trying to export their foodstuffs.
That's right.
So, but in those farms, there was so much creativity, and people were inventing devices, and it was brilliant. And I'm sure it was very satisfying to those people too, with practical solutions to problems that arose for them. So there's lots of creativity in people, but it's all being captured by this monopolistic financial system we've got and channeled. And I think it's probably thwarting the nature of the people who get caught up in it, because they are not free. They've got to bow to the will of that institution and keep their mouths shut. So
exactly right. That's That's a very interesting point. I watched a video the other day, and it was talking about the different things that we can become obsessed about, and it doesn't really matter what particular discipline it is. It can be anything from computer games through to personal habits through to anything. But what it does in the end is it actually enslaves us. It enslaves us, and that's what we've got to look at. Is even the elites within the financial system, even the elites in there are slaves to the system. And the only way for us individually to be free is to have a secure base so that we can actually guarantee sufficiency, food, clothing, and shelter. That's a very good start. If every person had that, that's a very good start. And that's not a gluttony. That's not a puritanical perspective on things. That's just a basic food, clothing, and shelter. And then they're left alone to seek their own utopia rather than someone else's. A very good forum today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. This is Arnis Luks at the Freedom Forum.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thank you again.
All right, cheers, boys.